Hi guys, today we're going to be working on IXL Assignment QEB, solving two-step equations. First, let's refresh our memory on the basic steps of solving an equation. When we have an equation, or even an inequality, so for example, we have this one right here, 2x plus 5 equals 10. The entire purpose of solving that is we are trying to figure out what the variable is. So in this case, what is our x? Because a variable represents an unknown quantity, an unknown amount. In order for us to solve for that variable to figure out what value, what number our x is, we have to isolate our variable. We want to get the equation so that way its x is equal to something. So the variable is all by itself, and we're trying to get everything else to the other side of the equation. The way we do that is if you want to move a number. So in this case, our plus 5. If we're going to move that to the other side of the equation, the way we do that is inverse operations. So inverse is another name for opposite. They're opposite operations and they undo each other. So addition and subtraction are opposites. Multiplication and division are inverses. If you have a full-on fraction, the inverse of that is the reciprocal. So when you take your fraction and you flip it. That is what we need to do. That's pretty much our main focus of solving equations, is in order to get the variable by itself, we have to undo everything that's been done, and we undo that by doing the inverse, the opposite operation. When we have multiple steps, like in this case, we are adding 5, and we're also multiplying by 2. We continue with that theme of using inverse, of working backwards. So if we think about Pemdas, the order which we normally work, so order of operations, well, we inverse, we are going to go backwards on this too. So first, we're going to deal with any addition and subtraction. We would subtract that 5. Then we would deal with any multiplication and division. We would divide by that 2. Okay, now if you're like me, you're a visual person, you need to see examples, so let's hop straight into that. All right. Here we are on our IXL assignment QEB, solving two-step equations. In this first example, we want to solve for D. I always write these problems out. I encourage you guys to do that as well, especially if you get into some negatives, or later on this year, maybe even next year when you get into multi-step equations, when there's multiple steps, you need to show your work so that way you don't accidentally get stuff all jumbled up. So starting that habit now, building that good routine will help you later. We have 2D plus 4 equals 6. Our goal is to isolate that variable to find out what D stands for. I like to draw a line through my equal sign because that helps me visually separate my two different sides. Because my goal, my focus, is to get this variable by itself. Therefore, anything else that is with the variable, I gotta boot it, I gotta move it over to the other side. We do that by using inverse operations. We can see right here that we have a 2 being multiplied by our variable, and we also have a 4 being added to it. So what do we do first? Well, we continue with our theme of doing inverse, doing the opposite. So if we think about order of operations, Pemdas, you usually do multiplication and division before addition and subtraction, but we are undoing everything. We're going backwards. So you're going to deal with any addition or subtraction first, then the multiplication or division. In this case, we have a plus 4. What would be the inverse? What would be the opposite of adding 4? Subtracting 4. We are going to subtract 4. Now we have to do this to both sides. Because it's an equation, that means it's currently, both sides are equal. It is balanced. In order to keep it balanced, whatever we do to one side, we have to do to the other. Your 2D is not a like term. We're not subtracting 4 from there. We just bring that straight down. And here we have 4 minus 4, which is 0. So that undoes it. That's why we do the inverse, because that cancels it out. And then 6 minus 4 is 2. We have one final step, and that is to deal with any multiplication or division. In this case, we have 2 being multiplied by our variable. Because remember, one way we can show multiplication is by putting a number and a variable side by side. That means those two things are being multiplied together. The inverse of multiplication is division. And I like to show division with a fraction. So we are dividing both sides by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. So once again, by doing the inverse, we cancel that out and we're just left with one single variable of a d. 2 divided by 2 is 1. So that means our solution, our answer, d is equal to 1. On this first example only, I'm going to show you guys how to check your work, because this is a great test taking strategy if you ever forget the steps and you want to work a multiple choice question backwards, or you're on a high stake test and you're really nervous that you maybe made a mistake. You could take the extra time to check your work. The way that we check our work is, well, we said that d is equal to 1. So we're going to substitute, we're going to plug 1 back in for our variable and see if we in fact get the answer of 6. I will change to green and we'll do that over here on the left. So 2d plus 4, and it is supposed to equal 6. We solved this and we said d was equal to 1. So we're going to substitute, we're going to put 1 in for d and see if we in fact get 6. This, I'm not solving an equation. I don't have any variables anymore. I'm just simplifying. When you simplify, when we're not trying to undo anything, you just follow the normal rules of order of operations. We're going to multiply. 2 times 1 is 2. And then we're left with 2 plus 4, which is 6. And that's what we were supposed to get, right? So there we go. We just double checked. We confirmed that we didn't make any mistakes. We're good to go. All right, how about this one? 2d minus 3 is equal to 3. After I write it down, I like to draw that line. Remember, our focus is on the variable. So when you're trying to figure out what things you need to move, what operations you need to undo, zero in on the variable, and everything that is on that same side of the variable has got to go. Here we have d, and we notice that it is being multiplied by 2, but I'm also subtracting 3 from it. So what do we do first? We keep with our theme of doing opposites, so we're going to do opposite order of operations. We always start with two-step equations on adding or subtracting first. Well, I'm currently subtracting 3. What's the inverse of that? Addition. Addition is the opposite of subtraction. We are going to add 3 to both sides of the equation to keep it balanced. 2d is not a like term. We just bring it down. Negative 3 plus 3 is 0, so that's eliminated. 3 plus 3 is 6. I have one final step. That 2 is being multiplied by your d. What is the inverse of multiplication? Division. We're going to divide both sides by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. We're left with one single d, which is what we were going for. 6 divided by 2 is 3. Now that my variable is by itself, I know exactly what that variable represents. The number 3. Let's bump it up, see if we can find a slightly harder one. Here's a good one. Okay, 1 is equal to q over 4 minus 3. So it's okay that our equation is flipped. It doesn't matter. If we draw that line, that tells us that we need to focus in on the side with the variable. because that's what we want to move everything over to the other side. So here we're going to focus in on this Q. We're dividing it by 4. That's what that fraction is, because fractions are a way to represent division. So that is Q divided by 4. And we're also subtracting 3. Which do we got to deal with first? Addition and subtraction. You deal with addition and subtraction first. The inverse of subtracting 3 is adding 3. You're going to add 3 to both sides. 1 plus 3 is 4. We just bring down whatever we didn't mess with, which is our Q divided by 4. Negative 3 plus 3 is 0, so that zeroes out. All right, 4 is equal to Q divided by 4. One more step. What do we got to do? Hopefully you thought multiplication, because multiplication is the inverse, the opposite of division. So we are going to multiply both sides by 4. 4 times 4 is 16. Multiplication and division are opposite, so that cancels out, and we are just left with Q. 16 equals Q. We got our variable isolated. We know what that represents, the number 16. All right, this one's similar to what we just did, so let's bump it up again, try to get another one. Oh, this is a good one. All right, so this one looks a little bit different, so definitely pay attention. This is a really good one for us to discuss. 63 is equal to 7 times Q minus 78. Once again, we're going to start with our line right here. Now, there are 2 different ways that you can go about solving this equation. Method 1 would be you could use the distributive property. And then method 2 would be we could continue to use inverse operations. Let's go ahead and use the inverse operations on this, because I don't know about you, but if we use the distributive property, that means we're going to have to multiply 7 times 78. I don't really feel like doing that. Do you? Nah. This is a little bit of a special scenario. These parentheses, they kind of throw a wrench in things. They say, ooh, we're the exception to the rule. You got to do a little something special first, because that parentheses prevents us from adding 78 because it's trapped inside those parentheses. Therefore, we need to get rid of them first. And like I said, one way you could get rid of them is distribute that 7 and go about your way. The other way, which is what I'm going to show you, is inverse operations. We know that this 7 is being multiplied by Q minus 78. Well, what's the inverse of multiplication? Division. Therefore, we can divide both sides of our equation by 7. And when we get rid of that, that's going to clear out our parentheses. So 7 divided by 7, that is 1, which means we're just left with our Q minus 78, and our parentheses are gone because we dealt with that multiplication. And then what would be 63 divided by 7? 9. Much smaller number, a little bit easier to work with, right? Okay, now we have one more step. In this case, we see that it is Q minus 78. Therefore, we need to do the inverse. The inverse of subtracting 78 is adding it. We are going to add 78 to both sides of the equation. So 78 plus 9 is 87. And once again, if you get to a harder one like this and you don't want to accidentally hurt your SMART score, you can always double check your work by plugging that in, okay? All right, this one's pretty similar to what we just did. Here's a good one. All right, similar concept, only we got quite a bit of negative. So you do want to always be careful to follow those integer rules. And this is also where taking your time and writing it out can help limit any mistakes. We have -3 times the quantity of, that's how you say parentheses, p minus 55 equals -57. Once again, you have choice right here. You see those parentheses, that kind of throws a wrench in your plan. You have to get rid of those first. Option 1 would be you could distribute that -3. No problem with that. You will get the correct answer. I personally like to do division instead though, because if you go and try to distribute that 3, not only do you have to deal with negatives, you got to take 3 times 55. Ugh, that's too much for me, personally. Therefore, I am going to use inverse operations. So remember, we focus on the inverse. To clear those parentheses, we got to go in a slightly different order, and we're going to divide first, because that is going to clear out that -3. It's going to clear out those parentheses. We're going to divide both sides by -3. -3 divided by -3 is 1 and cancels out, so we're left with p minus 55. -57 divided by -3. Remember, with multiplication and division, if your signs are the same, your answer will always be positive. If your signs are different, your answer will always be negative. So in this case, a negative divided by a negative is a positive. We would have a positive 19. Final step, p minus 55. Well, the inverse of subtraction is addition. We are going to add 55 to both sides. So 19 plus 55 would be 74. Okay, let's see if there's any tougher ones. If not, that will have been our final example. All right, this looks the same as all the others. The only difference in the challenge zone is you have slightly larger numbers and you may have more negatives, but we have already done a couple like this. All right, it is your turn, guys, to go ahead and try it. Remember that you can reference the notes that you took in class. You can pause and use this video to take screenshots as notes. And of course, email your teacher if you need a little bit of help. All right, bye, guys. Good luck.